I'm very pleased this morning to welcome two Fruit Focus to join us. Jackie Rawlings from Defra, Marion Reagan from Hewlow Farms, and Chris Hartfield from the NFU. I'll let them each introduce their area of work. They're all going to talk about different aspects of productivity for our sector this morning. We're going to try and keep to about 7 to 10 minutes each, so that we've got plenty of time for questions. So write the questions down or think about them as people are speaking. So without further ado, Jackie is bringing us really good news this morning, and I'm very, very pleased to be able to welcome her. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you. Ali, is this working? Yes, good. Thank you for having me today. Yes, as Ali mentioned, we finally managed to make an announcement yesterday on POs. Before I start, can I ask people just to raise their hands if they're a member of PO, so I can get an idea? Not too many, thank you. Thanks. So yes, the announcement confirms the previous government decision that the current EU fruit and vegetable aid scheme will be switched off in England in 2022. And we will do this by introducing secondary legislation into Parliament during the course of 2022 that will close the existing scheme to new entrants. So that means that this year is the last year that new POs will be able to implement an operational programme. The announcement also confirms the previous ministerial decision that current operational programmes will run through to completion and will be funded through to completion. New POs will be able to continue to get recognition under the overarching PO regime, and there is a consultation taking place later this year on that. But if you are recognised as a PO under the existing rules, then those rules will continue, whatever happens with new PO recognition. The secondary legislation will also contain transitional provisions that will move you seamlessly, I hope, from existing operational programmes through to future support for the sector. So that the announcement yesterday confirms that the government is looking at ways to better support the horticulture sector in the future. And my team in Defra will shortly be starting work with the sector on how best to support you. And we want POs to play a big part in that. We want the whole horticulture sector to play a part, but we also want POs to play a part. So we will be coming out to you in the next few weeks to kickstart that process, and I would encourage you to engage to ensure that you get what you want from the future. And what we will be looking at is ensuring that we can meet government priorities around increasing productivity, sustainability, innovation, R&D, that type of thing. That work should be finished by 2025 so that there will be a new support offer for the horticulture sector at that point. That's the easy bit. The difficulty is how we ease current POs from their existing programmes to the future support. We have, I think, explored every single option available, but there is no perfect solution because we continue to be tied to the existing EU legislation, and because we want to be fair to all POs, but you've all got programmes ending at different dates. So it has been a challenge, which is why it's taken so long to get that decision out to you. So what we want to do is allow POs with programmes finishing in the next couple of years to implement a new short transitional operational programme to avoid any air gap in funding once you finish your existing programs. So POs with operational programs ending this year should submit a new program for approval in September. Because we're now coming up to the end of July, I know that's a challenge. So there are things that we can do to help that. So we will be speaking with those POs to see what we can do to help you. But I would urge you, if you want to implement a new program, to make sure you're starting that process if you haven't already done so. Ideally, we would like those programs to be 3 years in length, so that brings you up to when the new support starts. But again, we can discuss that with those POs. And then POs with programs ending in 2022, we would urge you to complete your current programs as you have done for previous programs, and then work towards drafting a new program for approval next September, which would start in January 2023. And then in the meantime, next year, we will take a piece of secondary legislation through Parliament that will include provisions to switch off the scheme to new entrants, to allow you to complete existing programs, to allow POs to implement new 3-year programs, and also to make some minor changes to the types of actions that you can fund in your programs. So the overall amount of your operational fund will remain the same. So it's based on 4.1% of your VMP or 50% of eligible expenditure in the same way. So that the overall amount is guaranteed. But we would like to work with you to subtly alter the types of actions that you fund in your programs in order to better meet overall government priorities around innovation, sustainability and productivity. We are limited to the changes that we can make in the retained EU legislation for very complicated reasons that I won't go into today. But we would like to, for example, reduce the amount that you spend on admin or staff costs and increase innovation R&D spend. For a lot of you, I think that probably means very minor changes, because a lot of what you do is highly innovative anyway. For example, moving strawberry production from the ground to tabletops. I know that's happened in previous programs. That, to me, is innovation and increases productivity. So it's more of the same, if you like. But again, we will want to work with individual POs when you come to drafting your programs to help you support that. For programs that start in January 2022, we won't have the legislative backing to make those changes. So all we can do is subtly urge you to look at what you're funding in your programs and see what changes you can make. So I think probably that's all I can say for now. So this is an ongoing piece of work. The announcement, the ministerial agreement was only made yesterday morning, and the announcement made yesterday afternoon. So clearly that's the very start of the process, but we really do want to work with you going forward. So I'll stop there and then take questions, because I'm sure there will be some.
Thank you very much, Jackie. I mean, that's great news for all of those businesses in the room that are involved in POs. And it's great news to hear that there's a commitment to a future scheme. And I'd personally like to thank Jackie, because I know that she's been working really hard on all of our behalves, not just in the last 24 hours, but over the last few weeks. So thank you very much, and to the team. So I'm very pleased to be able to welcome Marion next. Hulo Farms, I'm going to let you introduce the business, and hopefully I've got some slides here that I can make work.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm Marion Regan, and if you're relying on my biography in the programme, then it tells you something that obviously was lifted from some random Instagram post. So I'll just introduce myself to say that Hulo Farms, we grow several thousand tonnes of strawberries and cane fruit, both here and in Australia, in partnership with an Australian business. And we're particularly... we're a member of APO and a marketing cooperative in Bury Gardens. I'm a former chairman of that, and I've always been actively involved in R&D and innovation. And I want to share some thoughts about the productivity puzzle. And what's the puzzle? Well, it's our costs are rising, our prices are static, and we live in a very unpredictable and very changeable world. But the most productive solutions are not necessarily the most resilient. And also, typically, the most productive solutions are not necessarily what consumers or the market want. So we have to square this particular circle and look at at optimizing returns on a range of inputs. The obvious one is we want to improve labor productivity. But we also need to look at return on capital, on the land that we're using, and increasingly on productivity per unit of greenhouse gas emission or other natural capital measures. So we need to ask what are the trade-offs and what are the synergies. And I just sort of think that listening is very useful to follow on from Ali's the earlier session about labour availability, and also interesting to hear the announcement on POs about moving out of the soil and so on. I do think a lot of people think this is still how strawberries are grown. Back in the day, strawberries were a cash crop. It was an easy crop to get into. The significant cost of labour wasn't really incurred until the crop came to be picked. So it was okay to walk away from crops that we couldn't pick or market, and that was actually quite a common occurrence. Labour was more freely available, capital costs were low, and productivity was really low by today's standards. Now it looks rather different. It costs upwards of £125,000 at least to put up the infrastructure and establish a crop of strawberries per hectare. Obviously a lot more under more protected structures or under glass. So we need to look at the critical measure of productivity on capital. And although costs of borrowing worldwide are currently relatively low, that's probably a good thing because we really need to plan as businesses for much longer payback periods. This is acceptable if you have access to capital or access to PO funding and low inflation. But I'm sure I'm not alone here to scare myself by playing with those tools that give you internal rate of return or something for an investment. And if you just vary that cost of borrowing a bit, it gives you some pretty scary results. And then the other factor that we have as perhaps established soft fruit businesses is that as we have a growing demand and a very popular and delightful product, a growing demand at least on the season shoulders, we're having to fund our move towards greater productivity in competition with those who have access to external sources of funding. There's many outside investors who are interested in our sector. It's very fashionable. It's perceived to be ripe for disruption. I was on a call with an investor from California about something completely different recently, and he said, we just look for sleepy industries, and we think this is one. And I've thought, come to Fruit Focus. But anyway. So capital. So obviously we are members of Bury Gardens, which is a marketing cooperative, and it became a producer organisation when we realised that actually we sort of already were one when the regime was first introduced. And that is one source of funding to fund the developments that are needed to enhance productivity. I feel that the current scheme has run its course. I'm actually personally glad to see it going. I really welcome the opportunity that Jackie has outlined to hopefully help us shape a scheme that will work for the sector going forward. I think the old one was adapted rather forcibly from a model, an EU model, which was designed for large regional co-ops with a sort of fundamentally socialist ethos. It's resulted in inefficiencies, the convoy travelling at the speed of the slowest ship, potentially inflated prices, delayed decisions, inflexible use of capital. So I'd like to see any replacement as more agile, with the ability for members to move between POs, which keeps the pressure on for performance enhancement of the growers' investment funds, because remember, we're paying considerably into these schemes. Other sources of capital. In Australia, there is quite good grant schemes, and of course the Farming Transformation Fund will be interesting. Be nice to see some specific horticultural use of that. And then, of course, go to the bank. But I have already mentioned longer paybacks, and raising that money is not always easy, or approaching external investors. But that raises the question of, the structure of the family-run fruit business. Moving on to another measure of productivity. Obviously, it's easy to measure productivity in terms of tonnes per hectare, but that's a bit of a crude measure because there's quality, there's waste, there's cropping period. You can't see this very easily, but this is just a group of fields over 10 years growing strawberries, actually a range of varieties, but it does show that we have driven up yields, but arguably not as steeply as we really need to. And there is huge variability between crops, varieties, cropping periods and years. But there is... do move on, because there is considerable investment in novel production systems to drive up productivity and yield. So we're talking 100% substrate production. This is our own business, but it's typical of many. 100% substrate production in sustainable coir. We're all under protection, under glass and polytunnels. We use precision irrigation and application of nutrients. Much more sophistication in microclimate optimization, and a real focus on pollination. And obviously, we'll hear from Chris, but crop protection is a very sophisticated area now, and there's a lot to do there. So the innovation and technical ability of growers has really driven productivity improvements. I would say they've mainly come from precision growing, better planting material, and better genetics. And plants is a crucial part of this, and we, in common with other growers, have invested significantly in that huge part of the plant's life cycle, the point up to which it's planted in its fruiting position. Now, another aspect of productivity is food waste. Obviously, wasted fruit depresses productivity in so many areas, whether it's of labour, people have to pick these off, or in terms of the other metrics of yield and so on. Actually, grade outs are now much lower thanks to genetic improvements, better varieties, although size is still an issue. Some specifications are a challenge. And there are a few alternative processing outlets for food waste, fruit waste. We make, Sipsmith make a rather good strawberry gin with our strawberries, but they don't need very much. The most significant source of waste is fruit produced at the wrong time. And cropping profiles are really hard to get right. Sitting here in the third week of July, anyone can grow strawberries now and to peak in August. The real challenges are the other cropping periods. And knowing when your peaks are coming reduces waste due to unsold fruit, boosts productivity, helps labour planning, so boosts labour productivity. And so increasingly, we are developing tools such as this one to track different fruit stages and to use predictive machine learning to improve our crop estimation. The next, probably the sharpest tool in the productivity toolbox is genetics. But there are trade-offs here between things like quality and yield, disease resistance and yield. And this is where, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes it's not necessarily what the consumers want, which is the most productive solution. High-yielding varieties are sometimes slightly underwhelming. And in terms of market development, it's not very helpful to be putting what my father always used to call scraps of meat in punnets and putting them in front of the consumer. But for value lines, in some cases, this is considered good enough. I'm worried about dumbing down. So we do extensive variety trialling, both in strawberries, and we grow a range of varieties to meet the needs of the segmented market and to keep going over as long a period as possible. And this adds to our resilience as a business, but it might not be the most productive strategy when it comes to just pure tons. Similarly, we work with a range of raspberry varieties and programs, predominantly the Driscoll's program, which we just had a look at this morning and looks fantastic. So that leads us on to a bit of an obvious slide. Genetic improvements in fruit size has been a huge driver of picking productivity. This is a bit extreme because this is a wild strawberry. But that leads us into the issue of labour. Labour in a soft fruit business is typically 35 to 50% of all costs, in some cases higher. And its availability, and this is not just here in the UK, labour availability for manual horticultural tasks is a challenge everywhere in the world. These are headlines from a couple of years ago, but from all over the world. It certainly focuses our attention on making the people that we do manage to recruit much more productive. The next slide is a sobering one. This shows a price index, which is actually just the percentage of the price in 1999. So in real terms, it's actually much flatter than that, against the rising cost of labour minimum wage. And now we don't pay age-related rates anymore, so actually it's more steep than that. So that is the productivity challenge, not just labour availability, but labour cost. So we strive to recruit, train and retain the most productive seasonal staff and really optimise their experience with us. And the previous session was very interesting. We do recruit from a range of sources. We have returning pickers from EU countries who have settled or pre-settled status. We were early adopters of the Seasonal Workers Pilot Scheme. We have people from a range of countries. And we actually do have a number of UK resident workers, particularly on the manual non-harvest tasks, which suits people better because you don't have to start at 5 a.m. You can travel in. You have a different driver if you're a UK resident worker. But we do really have a mantra at Hewlow Farms to grow crops that are a joy to pick. So it isn't just providing the best training and laying out the field and growing a fantastic crop and presenting it well. It's also ensuring that people have a good experience while they're with us, that they have the really good quality supervision and the best team experience. But the last point I wanted to highlight, which is that we must provide good earning opportunities, and piecework is an essential part of this puzzle. It correlates effort and earnings, and that drives productivity. And with a seasonal workforce living away from home, we really, both they and we rely on a fair and well-implemented piece rate system. And this is what works. But of course, the trade-off is, you can't see this, but more non-harvest manual tasks have arisen. So we simply need to automate, mechanize, or augment people doing those manual tasks. The green ones say crop removal, planting, and irrigation, and good progress has been made on replacing or augmenting manual labor and with better data-driven solutions or actual mechanization in those tasks. The amber ones are crop protection and harvesting, and there's work going on there to improve productivity in both of those areas. The red one is non-harvest tasks, all the other dexterous manual tasks that we need to do in order to ensure good crop presentation and crop health. And one of the solutions is just to stop doing them, to breed varieties that don't need us doing half of those things, or to change our growing systems so we don't need to do half of those things. But there is a lot of innovation going on in this space. And the big prize, obviously, that's attracted private investment is the development of harvesting robots. We work with Dogtooth Technologies, and these are a fleet of their robots in Australia, but not last season because we couldn't get there. But they're now operating semi-commercially, fleets in the UK. They're improving all the time. But if I tell you that we had a team of pickers just a few days ago, small team of returnees who averaged over 50 kilos an hour in the field that they were picking in a 7-hour picking period, and the top picker, John, was picking, just under 100 kilos an hour. So robots are a few years from commercial impact, but I have no doubt that they will make that impact. And there are easier, perhaps smaller targets for mechanisation, and a large part of our innovation programme at Hewlow Farms is devoted to this. So we are also using the Saga Thorvald robot to look at application of UV light for mildew control. We use this machine, which is mechanised distribution of biopesticides. We've looked at mechanised leaf removal, and it helps that we've got a vineyard. An awful lot of technology developed for vines is quite transferable and quite interesting. And we've done a lot of work on mechanising crop establishment and removal. But I have to wonder whether we'll be moving towards more predictable environments as we need more mechanisation and automation. And of course, more predictable environments means, flat, level, permanent structures, which requires capital. I've just written C earlier, so my point's about capital. But there is another form of capital. There is absolutely no good being super productive on all of these measures if we're damaging the environment. But happily, there are synergies here between productivity and natural capital optimization. The fourth point in our Hewlow Farms greenhouse gas reduction plan is to improve productivity from every input, which obviously drives down emissions per kilo of fruit produced, has numerous benefits for labour productivity, and in turn, next slide, this also boosts biodiversity. Sparing land that would otherwise be used to produce berries, and the precision growing techniques that we need to adopt for this programme delivers other benefits such as improved water stewardship. So my big asks on productivity, not just of government, but asks of ourselves, are we need good genetics, continuous investment in good genetics. We need returnees. to come back and pick our crops. The SWP scheme is great and terrific, but I'm worried about the low level of returnees that will be allowed, because the chap who picked just shy of 100 kilos an hour was not somebody who had only been on the farm for a few weeks. We also need flexibility around their length of stay if we're really going to drive up labour productivity and give them a great earning opportunity and the best possible experience on the scheme. We need a sensible and flexible PO scheme, tax breaks for innovation, and direct government support for innovation, of which we are obviously tremendously concerned that some of the crucial pre-competitive work on existential threats to our industry, such as the spotted winged Drosophila and the next one coming down the road, might not be addressed. So we need support for that. And then finally, a bit of a plea for support from customers for innovative growers. Longer-term relationships build productivity and resilience, which serves to grow the market in the way that the consumers want and need. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Marion. I think that was a really good overview of all the things that we think about on a daily basis as farmers and growers in this sector. Thank you. It's an excellent presentation. We are running over time. I didn't dare stop Marion in her tracks. Chris, can you keep it relatively short?
I'll try and be quick.
Okay,
I'll blast
thank you.
through. Unfortunately, next slide, made the error of putting lots of clicks in, so let's just get rid of those all the way to the bottom. There we go. Right, so clearly crop protection is a big factor in terms of kind of meeting that productivity challenge. But I'm going to start here with, there are some real opportunities here. The first is, the industry is committed to meet these challenges. Growers and farmers should be proud of their achievements, what they've achieved today under the National Action Plan. We've got world-leading work in raising standards in reducing the risks around pesticide use. But we all recognise the need to do more. But we're up for the challenge. There's things in the 25-year environmental plan about putting IPM at the heart of all crop protection decisions. But we recognise that. We're up for that challenge to deliver change, deliver innovation, and this sector, the fruit sector, is very well advanced in many of these respects. We have a regulator in CRD that has a lot of expertise and efficiency, and it's got a long track record in Europe of being the voice of scientific reason. So we need to monopolise on this. I mean, its performance has decreased to some extent in recent years because it's been dealing with Brexit, but if it's well resourced, this efficiency, this expertise, this science sense is a definite opportunity going forward. Following on from that, there's a clear opportunity for us to move away from an EU regime that's become increasingly politicised and increasingly precautionary. But actually, it doesn't need revolution. The EU pesticide policy that we've cut and pasted into UK law has aims to protect human health, animal health, the environment, but it also has aims to effectively support productive and competitive agriculture and horticulture. The problem is the EU lost its way and it becomes solely focused on the protection. So, taking all those things into account, I think there is a real opportunity for a triple win where we continue to maintain the highest standards of protection for consumers and the environment, but continue to enable trade, but also deliver better and more effective outcomes for UK growers' businesses. So next slide, and click, click, click to the bottom. Great.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. So a lot of this is wrapped up and captured within the NFU's plant health strategy. And briefly, the vision of the strategy is to develop sustainable plant health solutions that enable farmers and growers to produce crops that meet the needs of consumers, the environment, and profitable farming businesses. It's got 5 pillars. The first is about available solutions. That's about having a choice, a resilient and effective choice of crop protection solutions for those pests, weeds and diseases you face. It's about putting IPM at the heart of all those crop protection decisions you make. It's about agronomic advice, and it's not just about agronomic advice being IPM focused, as a lot of it already will be, and particularly in this sector, but it's about recording and reporting, monitoring and evaluating that IPM work that is done on farm. The fourth area of work is about transparency, and this is about the need to be open and transparent about our pesticide use as an industry to improve trust. And lastly, it's regulation. And that's about getting the right policy framework and regulatory framework in place that enables the development of sustainable plant health solutions. Now, the NFU is working in all of these areas, whether it's getting involved, I think about the last 12 months in emergency authorisation process to get insecticides to control spotted wing Drosophila, which we mentioned earlier. We're running the only test and trial, the only environmental land management scheme test and trial that's looking at how the future sustainable farming incentive could support the uptake of IPM. We've also had the mammoth task this year of responding to government's consultation on the future National Action Plan for Sustainable Use of Pesticides. So threats. So some of these you'll be very familiar with. The loss of actives, and it's not so much actually the loss of actives. The issue is more that they're not being replaced with sustainable, safer, more effective alternatives. Development of resistance is a clear threat. The poor public understanding of pesticide use is another threat, and we see understanding there that's often based more on fear and mistrust than it is on fact. And we've also seen how that opinion can overtake the fact to politicise the process and drive decision making. So public perception is one reason why as an industry we recognise the importance of transparency and trust and increasing that. And there's no doubt that the current regulation we've basically cut and pasted from the EU is very conservative, but the greater problem really is the way in which it's been applied, which in the EU has been increasingly precautionary, increasingly political. It's fine to take a precautionary approach to protect from harm and prevent harm, but to be able to make that decision, you need to be able to assess the proportionality of that action, of that proposed action. And this has seriously been lacking in the EU. And going forward, it must feature in the future UK approach. Now it follows then, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right. It follows that arguably the biggest threat then going forward for the UK is not being able to kick the EU regulatory habit. We've cut and pasted the EU legislation into UK legislation, and the danger is that our regulatory experts continue to deliver that regulation using the same approach that they've used for the last 10 or 20 years, fundamentally the EU approach. For the moment we can work with the regulation we've got. There are improvements that can be made now without changing the legislation, but what we need is a different approach to how it's implemented. It needs to be tailored to GB needs. It needs to deliver those crop protection solutions that UK growers and farmers need, and for this to happen we need to kick that habit of regulating the EU way. And what we need is actually a mandate. For that to happen, we need a mandate from Defra ministers, and I've said this directly to Minister Victoria Prentice. We need a mandate for change that then is driven down through government departments, agencies and other regulatory bodies. So bringing this back to increasing productivity, if you want to go all the way down to the bottom. So there are opportunities. The production needs to be economically sustainable, to be environmentally sustainable. We've heard about how the industry and growers are being pinched at the moment. You need to be running a profitable and productive business to be environmentally sustainable in the first place. With IPM, we've got the commitment through the National Action Plan to reduce the risk and impacts of pesticide use. And hopefully with all those other things I've talked about, the transparency and our focus on risk and science-based regulation, it shows we're committed and we're up for the challenge. But we need that change in approach. We need a more holistic regime, one that's horizon scanning, one that's proactive. An issue that often affects this sector is that after a product has come to the market for one of the other big commodity sectors, broadacre crops, arable crops, it's this sector that then has to look for uses to come on label to make it available in this sector. There are opportunities for efficiencies to bring much more uses on the label when crop protection products are first authorised. We need that impact assessment. We need better data, and we need government support to bring these things about. Now, firstly, the regulator's workload has increased significantly post-Brexit. It's implementing a regulation as a standalone autonomous regime now. It's not doing it with 27 other countries. That's more complex, that's more costly, so the regulator needs to be provided with the resources to be able to do that. And then we need that mandate from the Defra Secretary of State for more enabling, more UK-focused regulatory policy framework for plant protection products. And we need that to deliver safer, lower risk solutions being made available to growers, including supporting new technology like new breeding techniques. And to help ensure competitiveness, we also need support through things like the Environmental Land Management Scheme. The guys are over there from Defra talking about what that sustainable farming incentive could look like, how that could support IPM and risk reduction and risk management. So the NFU's been working on all of these areas through our response to the National Action Plan consultations. We've been working on specific availability of specific plant protection products. We've invested in research to better understand pesticide risk. And as I said, we're leading that project looking at how sustainable farming incentive in the future could support IPM. We're working actively in Westminster whenever the issue of pesticides arises and having regular meetings with Defra and CRD policy leads. So we're raising these issues, we're trying to provide the solutions about how we can improve the crop protection situation to better meet this productivity challenge.
Chris, thank you very much. It's really hard to get that subject into 4 slides in 10 minutes, so well done, because it's a massive subject.